Today we're talking depth of field, lens compression, perspective distortion, and focal length. All articles and videos that inspired me to put this together are linked in the description down below. I'm not going to get into deep, heavy physics explanations for my sake and for your sake as well. I'll keep this as easy to understand as possible and therefore as easy to explain as possible. And we'll go through some schematics to help us add a visual perspective to these concepts. Depth of field. Depth of field is essentially the leeway distance you have in front of and behind your focus point. This can be manipulated in camera by adjusting how wide the pupil opening is, so with your aperture, and also with distance. A shallow depth of field means less leeway. Using the duck and its surroundings as an example, let's widen the pupil and set the aperture to f1.7, and you'll see pretty much nothing around it is in focus, including this guitar, which is not that far away from it. So we have little leeway in terms of how close something needs to be for it to be within an acceptable state of focus. If I have a deep depth of field, I have more leeway and more stuff will appear to be acceptably in focus. Using our duck again, if we keep the exact same focus point and set the aperture to f7 for example, there's more behind and in front of if there was anything in front of the duck that will appear to be acceptably in focus. You'd be able to get away with more, so there's more leeway. Focal length refers to the distance between your lens glass and your camera sensor, and for those of you that might not know this, the sensor's location within the camera width is marked by this little symbol called the film plane mark or the focal plane mark or the focal plane indicator. And lens compression or perspective distortion refers to when background elements appear larger as you zoom in while keeping the subject within the same place in the frame. But there's a little more to it than that, and it's not strictly a compression that comes with your lens, though yes, it looks like a compression. It really is a change in or a distortion of perspective that comes with using different focal lengths, and it's actually really cool. So let's go into the schematic so we can try add a visual perspective to what it is that I'm trying to say. And hopefully with this visual representation, I'll be able to show you how your camera settings from aperture, your focal length, along with space, distance, and composition can have an effect on distortion and depth of field. And it all comes down to what your focal length allows you to see within the frame. And I just realized that that last sentence is redundantly stupid because I've literally just described photography. Okay, so we went out to an open space and took 4 photos of the same subject. This person here, also known as Julia. I made an effort to keep the subject in the same space within the frame. So as I zoomed in, I needed to move back to keep them within the same space within the frame, and I used my grids to help me do this. Note the angle of view for 12mm with this framing, and now note the angle at 25mm with the same framing, 40mm, and then 60mm with the framing. Note how the framing of the background will change with the angle of view. The varying background coverage within the framing gives us the illusion of compression, but it really is just the change in perspective, which is determined by what the lens allows the sensor to capture within that field of view, which is determined by the angle of view. So if we try to spit this out in one sentence, the focal length will dictate the angle of view. The angle of view will dictate field of view or framing, and what you see within the frame or the field of view is dictated by distance. And I think that might have been 2 sentences. So the 60mm shot changes the perspective so we see less of the background compared to 12mm. This change of perspective makes it look like the background is closer at 60mm compared to 12. And on the converse of that, at 60mm, everything behind the subject appears to come closer to us. Everything in front of the subject moves further away from us. So both the background elements and the foreground elements appear to be moving closer to the subject, hence the term compression. And that's pretty cool, especially when you consider it's all dictated by perspective. And with all of that, as the distance between the background and the subject remain constant, and because the aperture remained constant, the depth of field should remain relatively stable. If we compare the building line here between the 12mm and 60mm shot, you can argue that there are similar amounts in focus or out of focus or whatever your perspective may be on that. So depth of field is on a practical level dictated by 2 factors: the size of the pupil opening, which you control with aperture, and then also with space or distance. Strictly speaking, professionals and scientists refer to pupil opening and distance, but to keep it as simple as possible with my camera in hand, I just say aperture and space or distance. And I suspect you might agree with me based on the images. If keeping the aperture constant and keeping your subject within the same space in the frame, your focal length will not affect your depth of field. Your focal length will, however, affect or distort the perspective of the elements surrounding your subject. A shorter focal length makes surrounding elements, background and foreground, appear further away from the subject, and longer focal length distorts the perspective and makes the surrounding elements appear closer to the subject. And that distortion is created by the perspective that changes with distance. And if you investigate, you'll find the depth of field is similar. So what do we take from this? What do I take from this? With your camera, you can control depth of field using your aperture or distance, which in turn are dictated by your focal length or framing. And 2, lens compression or perspective distortion, whatever you choose to call it, is pretty cool.